Hello everybody, this is Niclas Huschenbeth, and in this video I would like to cover a chess opening and give you an introduction to the French opening, and give you an overview on what this opening is all about. So I haven't done many chess videos on openings on my channel yet, and I thought I'll try to go into this direction and you guys can let me know how you like it. So what is the French? The French is started when white goes e4 and black plays e6. Already now we talk about this opening as the French pretty much, even though really the French position comes about after d4, d5. So black first played the move e6 so that he supports this advance of the pawn to d5, so that if now white takes on d5, which is by the way the French exchange variation, he can take back with the pawn, and he doesn't have to take back with the queen, because if you don't want to get your queen out early in the game, as it can be attacked, and then your opponent, in this case white, wins tempos to develop his pieces. So just to show you what I mean by this, it's actually another opening. If after e4 d5 immediately, then white takes, queen takes back, now the queen is out early and white can immediately win a tempo by developing his knight. This is the Scandinavian opening, by the way. We can cover this in another video. So black goes e6 first. In general, in the openings, what you'll see a lot is that there's a fight for the center. What is the center? The center are those four squares: e4, d4, e5, and d5. And the center is very important in chess, because who has control over a center can more easily develop his pieces and can go in both directions, to the king side and to the queen side. So what we'll see in many openings is that there's a fight for the center, and that's what we also see here. Now white has different ways to react to this. Of course, right now his pawn is threatened on e4, so the two main moves here are to defend this pawn by either playing knight to d2 or knight to c3. There's one other way to play, except for e takes d5, which we already saw, which leads to symmetrical positions. There's the move e5, which is the advanced French variation, which is a little bit rarer than the knight moves. And here what happens usually is that black plays c5, c3 and knight c6, and in the following black will put pressure on this pawn on d4. For example, by bringing the queen to b6, maybe developing this knight via e7 or h6 to f5, and putting a lot of pressure on this pawn on d4. In general, this is what you want to do in such positions with a pawn chain, as we'll see here. You want to put pressure on the base of the pawn and of the pawn chain, and this pawn chain starts here after black takes on d4, of course. So black has two ways to attack the pawns, either on the pawn chain or also on the pawn front, and these are the typical kind of pawn moves to open up the position for black here. So let's talk about the other two moves, knight d2 and knight c3. Knight d2 is a move I've played for a long time, and it leads to oftentimes slightly better positions for white, and I quite like that there's not a lot of risk involved. Now black has many different moves available. There's c5, which is the main move, there's knight f6, there's even bishop e7, another developing and kind of waiting move, and there's also the so-called Rubinstein variation, where black takes on e4, white takes back, and now black develops his pieces, knight f6, knight d7. Knight d7 is the main move to play knight f6 next move. And this is quite an untypical position for the French, because black has taken on e4 already and white has more space here. On the other hand, this is a very solid position and is preferred by players who like no weaknesses in their position and just play solid, sound chess. A big expert in this variation is German Grandmaster Meyer. So, like I said, after knight d2 there are different ways to continue. Main move is knight f6, and here after e5, knight ft7, we once again get similar to what we just saw, this the pawn has advanced, but now it's under more favorable circumstance for white, as he has already moved his knight, and typically it continues like this: bishop d3, c5, c3, knight c6, knight e2, and white is developing his pieces naturally, and there's a lot of theory here. Black will go f6 at some point, and in the resulting positions, to my mind, white has a little bit better pawn structure and is a little bit better. I like to play these positions with white. Going back to knight d2, bishop e7 is another move. It's an interesting waiting move, but I don't want to talk about it right now. Let's see the move c5, which is the main move, and I think it's also the best move for black in this position. Black immediately tries to do something in the center. White has different moves available. The main move is takes, queen takes, knight f3, takes, bishop to c4, attacking the queen. And yes, black is up a pawn right now, but white will win back this pawn. Let's see how this works out. Just to give you an idea of the kind of positions that you would get here, is this position. And this is where I want to stop for a moment. I know it was a lot of moves now, but I want to just give you an idea of the nature of the character of positions you would get in this line. And in this line, this is the so-called Rubinstein structure. Black has 2 pawns on the queen side and 4 pawns on the king side here, which is in general more favorable for black because he has more and more center pawn. You always want to have more center pawns because then you get the better control of the center. Okay, and on the other hand, white has more pawns on the queen side and less pawns on the king side. So it means that white wants to create a pass pawn here on the queen side since he has a pawn majority there. You always want to play where you have your pawn majority. There are a lot of variations here. It's quite complex. White has a little lead in development, but to me it seems that this variation is completely fine for black. Let's go back and take a look at the absolute main move, knight c3, which I consider to be the most ambitious try for white. Here black pretty much has 2 main moves. Of course he could once again transpose to Rubinstein by taking e4, but he can also play the moves bishop to b4 and knight f6, with the later being the more popular move. Let's first look at bishop b4, just to once again give you an idea of the kind of structures that arise here. And this is all very sharp play, and we see this pawn structure. Black gives up his bishop to weaken the white pawn structure here, give him double pawns on the c file. Excuse me. On the other hand, this bishop will often be missing for black as the dark squares are more available for the bishop, and often you see something like this, a4 and bishop a3, and black might get problems on the dark squares. There are a lot of sharp lines here. There are many lines where actually the queen comes to g4, takes on g7, takes on h7, black sacrifices a pawn, the so-called Wiener variation. It's very sharp, very, very sharp. There are also some more quiet lines like queen a5, queen a4. A lot of options here for black. Very interesting strategic struggle, and I think a good opening to also play for win with the black pieces. Last but not least, let's take a look at knight c3, knight f6, when white pretty much has 2 main moves here, bishop to g5 or e5. After bishop g5, black can take on e4 and get kind of a better version of the Rubinstein, more improved, or you can go bishop to e7 when once again the positions are quite different. We have this pawn structure, and white can go h4 here, off to sacrifice a pawn, or you can take on e7 and then try to stabilize his center pawns, as black will definitely attack the pawns again with c5 and maybe with f6 later on. And after e5, typically play develops like this, knight to d7, f4. We once again see this attack to the pawn chain here with c5, knight f3, knight c6, more pressure on the pawn, bishop e3, and from here on it can really spread out in all kinds of directions to play. There are many different ideas to play with black, but typically white will, well, this not typically, white can castle short or queen side, and depending on that, white might start an attack here, pushing his pawns forward. Actually, the h4, h5, something like this is very typical of white castles to the queen side, whereas black will often push his pawns forward here, a6, b5, and once again put pressure on this pawn on d4. In some cases even play c4 to close down the queen side and then to further play on this side of the board. This is a very complex position, but I think it gives good chance for both players to have an interesting struggle to play for a win. So very interesting choice. just in general, I want to say that I first played this move, knight d2, for a long time, because here, like I said before, it's a sound choice, and white often gets these tiny better positions without playing for a lot of risk. Whereas after knight c3, you have more risk, but you also have more attacking chances as the white player, especially if you play the main lines. So this is just a choice that you have to make as the white player if you are playing 1e4 and you're facing the French. Alright, so this is my overview over the French. I hope this was interesting to you guys. Please let me know in the comments how you like these kind of opening overviews, introductions to the openings, and then I can do more of them if you guys are interested. Alright, looking forward to see you next time. Bye bye.